Hi everyone, my name is Selim.Digital and I want to wish you all a happy new year. Normally I am vlogging about my carnivore journey, but I just finished reading a book that I thought was worth exploring as it's related to my self-improvement journey. So I just finished reading a book called Make It Stick by Peter Brown, and the book is about the neuroscience of learning and how that knowledge of what makes it possible for humans to best absorb material. What's really interesting is in the education sphere, we don't use much of the proven techniques that really do work well to encode information into our long term. This is extremely important to me because, well, I love learning and I like improving and I like being a better version of myself. And it's incredibly frustrating when I read a book and it just kind of disappears into my thoughts like, oh, I think I've read that book, but I just don't remember anything about it. And I know for my students, it's incredibly frustrating. You know, they go through a long year of trying to learn material and then basically they learn it well enough to take a test and then it's like they have never even heard of the term osmosis because, well, we do such a good job of forcing students to encapsulate or encompass information for a short-term gain, but we don't do much to help them encode that information into their long-term consciousness. Rather than trying to read a book for fluency or the feeling of understanding, which is what we most of the time do, we should read information with the intention of engaging in active recall. Active recall is the act of reading a certain amount of material and then trying to rephrase and restate what the author was trying to teach in as specific a way as you possibly can. This serves two goals. One, it takes information from our short-term memory and helps encode it into our long-term memory. And two, it gives us an informal and easy way to assess how much we've actually learned. If I had just read, for example, a paragraph on photosynthesis, and I was able to say, okay, the formula for photosynthesis is if I take 6 units of carbon dioxide plus 6 units of water and sunlight within the chloroplast, then the chloroplast is able to recombine those carbon dioxide and water molecules and create a molecule or a unit of sugar along with 6 units of oxygen gas that are expelled as waste. That level of active recall would suggest that I have a strong command of the information. That if, on the other hand, I said photosynthesis is something that happens in a plant, well, that would suggest that maybe I didn't retain a significant amount of information, and then that would help me and say, okay, I clearly didn't get nearly enough out of that reading. Let me go back, reread it, and attempt to understand it. What is it that we actually wind up doing, especially in school? Well, students might underline or highlight important things. They might review their notes, and they get this feeling of like, oh yeah, I get this. It's not a big deal. I've seen this material 3-4 times, so I can totally use it on a test. But that comfort, that feeling of fluency is kind of dangerous in the sense that it gives you the illusion of understanding. But it's because you're not testing yourself. There's no way of knowing whether you actually understand the material. This idea of active recall is incredibly useful. I've been using it with my students, and what I've seen is they don't like it at first, but like any muscle, the more you build it, the stronger it gets. Their ability to recall has been increasing as I have been forcing them at the end of class to actively recall what they heard. So what I'll do is I'll simply say, okay, turn the page, write down as much as you possibly can. And what I'm seeing is students went from 1 or 2 sentences to half a page of information that they could actively recall. Does that mean that they will retain it a day or 2 later? That's where the second part of Make It Stick comes in, this idea of interleaving active recall. It's not enough to do it once and then say, okay, you've got it. You want to space out this repetitions of active recall. You do it right after you read, and then that helps to encode some of that information into your long-term memory. But Our brains have filtering mechanisms so that we don't encode things unless we really need to. This is why you have to keep practicing. So maybe you might engage in active recall right after you read something, then a day or two later, then a week later, and then maybe even a month later. And that repetition, not consistent, but that interspaced repetition, is what transfers that information into your long-term consciousness. Now, it doesn't do it perfectly, but what winds up happening is the amount of time it takes to review material winds up decreasing. I might not automatically perfectly remember the formula for photosynthesis, but I can just quickly review the textbook and say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I needed. Most people think of education as something that a teacher bestows upon you, and if the teacher is really good, then maybe that teacher can instill more information into a student than another. The reality is, and I think this really encapsulates the entire book, if learning isn't effortful, then it is not permanent. There has to be active effort on the half of the learner in order for this stuff to stick. There's too much information out in the world that the brain will filter, and your brain basically says, if it's easy to get, then I don't actually need to learn it. This is a wonderful book. I strongly recommend anyone pick it up. It will help you learn. No ifs, ands, or buts. Everybody can find ways to improve their ability to retain information, and I think that this book can really make strong headwinds in terms of being able to do these things more efficiently. I strongly recommend that any teacher buy this book and read it and start to implement it in their own life. And then, bit by bit, work it into your students' lives. It can work at different ages. Having kids just write down what they heard, or even just rephrasing it, recapitulating it, will help them retain this information. And doing it in interspaced intervals will help then solidify that information. When I evaluate books, I ask myself 3 questions. Did I learn something from it? Would I reread it? And would I give this book to other people? Now, self-help books tend not to lend themselves to rereading. Usually, if you get the book, you understand it, you don't have much of a need to reread it. But this one, I might consider rereading parts of. I absolutely learned a tremendous amount. I think that this book has immediately helped me become better at learning. And honestly, it's something that I wish I had learned much earlier. And this is a book that I absolutely would give to other people. So as a teacher, I think about rubrics. So for each of these, I would give the score for learning a 3 out of 3, for rereading a 2 out of 3, and a gifting a 3 out of 3. So 8 out of 9 is the score that I would evaluate this book by. So strongly recommend it for anybody who wants to continue to improve their ability to learn. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you buy the book and use it, and let me know how it goes. I really would love to hear if you have implemented any of those strategies that the book offers and how those have helped you. I've been writing book reviews for several years and posting those on my blog at Selim.Digital. If you want to check that out and other books that I've read in the past, please go check out my blog. All right. Thanks a lot, and I will see you at the next book.